is faced with a situation they're not truly prepared for. In these situations, how these situations are handled is what separates an average speaker from the greats. Okay, April 4th, 1968, a dreadful day in American history, Martin Luther King was assassinated. As news passed, riots began to break out all over America. Okay? Now, despite being advised not to attend a scheduled speech, Robert Francis Kennedy felt the necessity to give a speech. And he didn't just give a speech. No. He put out a raging fire that was sparked in the souls of those who were listening as he broke the news of the death of MLK. And he did it all in about 6 minutes. And if you watch this video up here, you'll never see him look down at his pamphlet after the 32-second mark. And you can keep looking up there. I promise you'll never catch him do that. This shows he spoke from the heart. Today I'll be discussing Robert F. Kennedy's speech over the death of Martin Luther King. First, I'll paint the picture by showing you the settings. Then I'll show his communication style. And last, I'll give you the outcome of this speech. Now, the setting of the speech is just as important as the speech itself, because it can take a regular speech and turn it into a speech remembered throughout history. And Robert F. Kennedy's speech definitely had this potential. Now, as he was boarding the plane to head to Indianapolis, Indiana, where he was to give a presidential campaign speech, he was advised by many not to go. So a Washington Post article written by Michael S. Rosenwood, who has a bachelor's in journalism from Southern Illinois University, stated, "They pleaded with Kennedy not to go," and they being his campaign aides, his wife Ethel, and the police chief of Indianapolis. Okay, now the police chief even went as far as to say is if a riot broke out, he wasn't sure that they could actually contain that riot. But regardless, Kennedy pushed through. And as the speech started, it started after dark, okay? So sun set about 7:12 p.m. that night, so it started between 7:30 and 8 p.m. He's speaking in a poor, predominantly black neighborhood. And his stage is the back of a flatbed truck. Okay, so despite all of these things saying don't do it, Robert Kennedy felt the necessity to speak. And speaking is kind of an understatement of what he did that day. No, he didn't just speak to that audience. He connected with them. He used identification as his communication style. In my communication theory book at page 298, the editors wrote about Kenneth Burke's view of rhetoric. And he has to have said that the key term for old rhetoric was persuasion and its stress upon deliberative design. The key term for new rhetoric is identification, and this may include partially unconscious factors in its appeal. Now, I won't bore you with the communications lesson, but I need you to understand some few concepts, okay? So, old rhetoric, he said, was persuasion. This was quoted by saying stressed upon deliberative design. Okay, this means words and phrases were put together in order to convince this crowd that he was speaking to of what he was saying, okay? But now Burke said that identification was a better way to go because if a speaker could identify with the crowd and truly connect with that crowd, then they could really persuade that audience not only to listen to them but to agree with what they're saying. Now, this also included partial unconscious factors, and for Kennedy, this is speaking about the death of his brother. Okay, something he rarely did, but he felt the need to in order to connect with this crowd. So in Kennedy's speech, he said, "For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and distrust at the injustice of such an act, I can only say that I feel in my own heart the same feeling. I had a member of my family killed. He was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to better understand, to go beyond these rather difficult times." And this is where he truly connected with his audience. He let them know, I get it. You're pissed off. You're mad. I myself had somebody near and dear to my heart killed. So I understand how mad you are, but we have to come together like Martin Luther King said. We have to come together in order to build the country that we want for ourselves. Now you can see how he truly connected with the crowd by the outcome of this. And the outcome was truly measured by the way everybody left the speech that night. So as I said, there were riots all over America. Cars and vehicles being vandalized. There was looting and violence. And a post in the Chicago Tribune by James Coates says, "No official death toll was given for this tragedy. Although published accounts say 9 to 11 people were killed during the rioting, and 350 people were arrested for looting, and 162 buildings were destroyed by arson." And that's just in Illinois alone. That's not including everywhere else in America, okay? But in Indianapolis, Indiana that night, there was no reported rioting at all. Now, most everyone in the audience must have felt the same way due to the lack of outbreak of those riots. Okay, there were no riots, as I said. And in conclusion, you can imagine the feeling in the air after this speech. Kennedy used raw emotions in order to connect himself and tie himself to every person in that audience. And you can truly see that he really meant what he said, because if you were paying attention to that video, he didn't look back down at that pamphlet, meaning he was really speaking from the heart. Despite the length of the speech, between the crazy settings and everything going on, with the compassion and identification used in the speech itself and the effect it had on the people there, this is definitely a speech that will be echoed throughout history.